Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
It's not quite one yet. Thank you, councillors. It's now gone 1 o'clock and we are live. So welcome to everyone that's here. Welcome to those that are listening, and thank you for joining in. Please be seated. Just on the beginning of the meeting, I just want to present a certificate, one that we're proud to be able to do. As you may be aware, Council's motion that Peter Denham is to the role of Deputy Municipal Emergency Management Coordinator. That is a mouthful. I am pleased to announce Peter has officially been appointed to the role by the Minister for Police, Fire and Emergency Management. The position of Deputy Municipal Emergency Management Coordinator carries it with a very responsibilities for emergency management in our municipality area. These responsibilities require your commitment and dedication to the role, Peter, and to those your fellow coordinators, including Shane Eberhardt as a Municipal Emergency Management Coordinator. And we thank Shane for the work that he's done in that piece. Congratulations, Peter. I know that you will continue to serve your community as you have done so in many years, and we wish you well in this role. And here's a certificate. So, any declaration of interest? No. Confirmation of the minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 11th of February? Moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors. No deputations, no petitions. We do have a community report. This is Rosie Saville.
And Spock.
I wasn't sure which one was here. Spock and Gracie, but it's just Spock, is it?
Just Spock, yeah. Gracie was otherwise indisposed.
Anyway, welcome.
Thank you. On the 8th of December 2019, I stood before you, thanks to the support of Councillor Andrea Dawkins, and asked you to lead the way to providing an area to enrich the lives of adopted greyhounds. On the 25th of November 2020, I stood with my greyhounds, Spock and Gracie May, unclipped their leads, and for the first time let them run free in a dog park. Today I stand before you with my beloved Spock to give you feedback from the members of my pet greyhound group Great on how they feel about their new off-leash park and what they say about their greyhounds' experiences there. Their comments are, I freaking love it. A fantastic place to take my hound. I feel happy that Jasper won't be molested or overwhelmed by other large dogs. He just loves to run free. I'm so happy Launceston City Council is mowing the area constantly, as it makes me feel safe that there are no snakes about. I take Sylvia there several times a week. She's a timid dog, but having a safe place for her to wander, sniff and meet other greyhounds has made a big difference to her confidence. Well done, LCC. Lenny loves to run with the other greys, and he loves the interaction with the dogs that run along the other side of the fence with him. I take Houdini there often, and he loves it, and he knows we are going there before we even get there. It's such a joy to see him run free. I love it. Many thanks, LCC. These are just some of the comments that are pretty well sum up how we feel about the area and the dogs, the difference it's made to the lives of our dogs. The joy and happiness on the faces of our members and the sheer pleasure on the faces of the greyhounds makes it so worthwhile. The area is perfect in size, shape and design. We look forward to having a poo bag dispenser and a bin and a seat. I'm told we'll get those soon. A gravel path to the Great Gate would be appreciated with winter coming. An internal extended path around the whole internal area would also be appreciated for us to walk to. Other dog owners in the adjoining off-leash stop and watch and have said how beautiful it is to see the greyhounds happy and running free. I hope more councils follow your lead and offer the same, as the take-up rate of adoptions must increase in Tasmania due to the new euthanasia rules introduced by Tas Racing. The new reduced kill rate will mean that more greyhounds will be adopted into our community, thus the need for these areas will increase in demand. So on behalf of all the adopted greyhounds and their owners in Tasmania, or Launceston more so, but this is the only one in Tasmania so far, I say thank you for listening, I say thank you for caring, and I say thank you for supporting greyhound rehabilitation and believing, like us, that they deserve the best life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Good to have the feedback. So there's questions on notice there, and any questions without notice for today's meeting? People come forward, please.
Thanks, Albert. Your Worship, the Mayor, councillors, council staff. I'm a resident of New Namara, have been for 4 decades. I own a small acreage, a home, pay rates. I'm here on behalf of many people who've come to me, rang me, met with me, and said, Myrtle Park's shut. We can't book the hall. There's no free public access. I said, yes, that's COVID. Council got a plan. I'd like to know your plan today moving forward, because I believe it's going to be shut from the 7th of April.
Thank you.
That's one of my questions.
Director Shane Everhard will answer that.
So I'm going to say our previous operator at the campground moved out about midway through last year, and council determined to run the site over the Christmas period at significant cost. We closed the free facilities to comply with COVID restrictions and to manage behaviour on the site. That was a temporary thing to get us through this season, and we don't know what the future COVID restrictions will be. So, but we would intend on opening that up as we can. We're about to go through a process to acquire new operators for the site, but we're really restricted to what the COVID requirements are. It's our intent to reopen. We just have to wait till the legislation and the requirements change.
Right, thanks. So I understand there's COVID problems, but the vaccines are available. Many other parks are available. Most other parks in the city are open. People camp at St Leonard's and Lilydale Falls Park, which are council operated. So, I understand what the situation's been with COVID, but it seems to be relaxing. Another concern is people from the area. There's a couple of families at Tayeen who have no access to this park for their children, so their closest park is Fingal, Scottsdale, Waverley, Lilydale, and it's virtually 100 kilometres round trip for them to take their children to the park. So that's why I'm asking you, what are your plans for the future?
You've heard the answer, and obviously if you know someone who's willing to operate it, then please give us those names or ask them to ring into the council as well, because that's really where we'll be at, is getting a good operator.
Yep. No, it's not up to me to supply.
You might know somebody. Just, I mean, if it's out there, we might get more people.
My question is, what are the plans for?
Well, that's the plan.
Immediate future.
Good operator.
And if, you know, like no one else in the community, Launceston community, would have to travel that distance to attend the park.
Anyway, we can't go on. It's not a discussion. We've answered the question. So thank you. Anyone else for a question?
Councillors and Mayor, Tasmanian Ratepayers Association Incorporated notes the answers received in relation to questions asked at the last council meeting, which we advise you we consider unsatisfactory and do not in fact answer in any ambiguous way what was clearly asked. Furthermore, we now ask if the $1.2 million cheque paid by council from a Melbourne branch of the Commonwealth Bank on behalf of a private developer as the deposit relative to a purchase contract for property at 4143 Patterson Street, now breached, has now been returned to a secure bank account in the name of the City of Launceston Council.
That's been answered, and as you're aware, this is currently a legal matter, and we're not going to...
I'm sorry, what was the answer?
Well, you can read it. It's in the agenda.
It's not in the agenda, I'm sorry. The question refers to a bank account of the City of Launceston Council. Has it been returned?
The question is, the answer to that question is that it's under a legal matter at the moment, and we're not commenting any further.
It is not a legal matter, Mr Mayor, with great respect,
anyway,
as to whether it is in a bank account of the Launceston City Council. Goodness me.
Thank you.
Please be unambiguous. Is it in the Launceston City Council's account?
Any other questions, or you may leave?
I do, thank you. Please answer that. You did not answer that question.
Do you want to answer any?
No, you've answered it appropriately, Mayor.
So please move on. Any other questions? Or?
So you refuse to answer the question, thank you.
No,
it is a concern to the Tasmanian Ratepayers Association Incorporated to hear that Council is using the threat of compulsory acquisition powers to facilitate a private developer's plans. Why is Council actively working to prejudice a private landowner and that owner's proper right to conduct its much valued car park business at 4143 Patterson Street, Launceston?
No, that is not correct.
Well, what isn't correct?
We are not...
The question is correct.
No, the fact that you're saying that we are trying to compulsory acquire as a threat, that is not true.
Well, Mr Mayor, I've read the correspondence. Would you like to see it?
No.
You wouldn't like to see it. Thank you, Mr Mayor. You're clearly not prepared to be truthful. Thank you.
I have been truthful. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, Robin Smith on behalf of Coffee Republic. Just to follow on from the question I asked last meeting. Question 2, the answer from the General Manager given was that the modifications or the lack of the installations of the bronzes in the Brisbane Street Mall were entirely at the feet of the advice received or the opinion of the traders. I asked that same question again for clarification. It was about the sites, the sands, the bronzes, the footprints and the projections. I asked the question again because I was incredulous that the traders were the sole reason that those installs weren't made. The council spent over $250,000 on the bronzes. Some of them even got as far as going into the mall, to the building construction site, and being placed in situ, yet they weren't ultimately installed.
Question, please.
I've spoken to the traders. I can't find any correspondence, and I haven't come across anyone yet that firstly isn't incredulous or secondly agrees with that position. Does council have anything it could give me to support that, such as correspondence, emails from traders, minutes of a meeting, officers' notes that would support that the theme wasn't installed as it should have been, please?
Yeah, do you want to comment, CEO?
What I would say, Mayor, is that obviously there were notes that were kept in respect of the meetings that were attended between the project managers and the traders. There was a reference group that was established. We had councillors or aldermen, as they were at the time, represented on that, as I recall. And so that information will be available, but we would need to seek that. Obviously, we haven't had pre-notice of the question, so we'll need to undertake some research and seek that information.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the public? Thank you. So now we've got this late item is correct, and the first part of that motion will be on the screen, I think, isn't it? Is that the run?
Two motions.
It's two, motion one. That we deal with this matter that's there. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Finlay, second to Councillor Spencer. We don't have a discussion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors, thank you. Then we have motion number 2, which is there as well, on the screen, I think, in a minute. Or is it? Under Provision of Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in determining this matter, and then grants delegation, etc., which is there in detail. Somebody happy to move that? Councillor Spencer moves, seconded. Seconded. Councillor Harris, thank you. So the discussion on that question, Deputy Mayor?
Last Friday, I believe there was a directions hearing with regard to this item. I wonder if we could be provided with an overview of what occurred at that meeting, please.
Thank you. Richard?
In the circumstances, no council officers were present at that meeting. It was dealt with by Glyn Williams. The report, council's lawyer, the report I have is that the parties moved towards mediation as a way of dealing with the matter, and that Glyn's instructions were that if that was the case, it would need to come back to council in the circumstances. And so we've been guided by Glyn's advice in the matter, and we brought this motion back to council to see whether council would consider consenting in the circumstances.
Yeah, subsequent question. So I believe a date was set aside in April. So in the event that this was not the avenue taken as recommended by council's legal advice, what would happen in April?
There would be a requirement to determine it at a hearing. So there's no compulsion for any party to consent to anything they don't wish to consent to. And if the parties to the appeal don't consent, it will go to a hearing where evidence will be produced and the tribunal will ultimately decide. And I don't have the exact date in April, but I presume they would have set a hearing date or a date to exchange evidence or something that leads us towards a determination.
That's further up. No? Councillor Mackenzie, question?
Yeah, so just following on from that, I guess my question is regarding the representors. You said there were people that were at the hearing. I spoke to one of the representors today and they were not aware of what was being proposed today. So if we make a decision in the affirmative to accept this, what is the position of the representors in relation to that matter?
Do you want to answer this one?
I spoke to the gentleman who lived behind the property because he was aware that there was an appeal lodged by the applicant, and so I advised him to speak to the planning tribunal, which he did, and he chose to not join as a party to the appeal. We've got that in writing on file, that he chose not to do that. So therefore, for their representatives to be involved, they have to choose to join as a party to the appeal, and if they haven't done that, they haven't got a right to attend the appeal.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
But sorry, in terms of clarity, they chose not to do that because they thought that council would be appealing on behalf of the decision made.
Yep.
Isn't that correct?
In that sense, yes.
So is it only...
But there is always the option that it could be mediated during the time.
Great. Should they be concerned that no one from the council attended? I mean, I haven't been, so I don't understand, but should the representatives be concerned that there was no one from the organisation there on Friday?
No, we were represented by our lawyer. The purposes of saying that was that we don't have any personal information of being there. We were briefed by our lawyer who was there. Yeah.
And Councillor Mackenzie, question.
Yeah, I'm just, again, questioning practice, and I don't know the answer because that's all the question what I'm asking, I suppose, is just in relation to, I guess, the fact that we did have one of the representatives, I think, joined that group in the mediation. Others weren't. I just question from the perspective of transparency and clarity for those that did represent and didn't go on to that particular aspect as to whether it would be good practice for us as a council to go back and let them know what was being agreed, because clearly that's going to impact on them if we make a decision today, and hence why we're needing to deal with it today. That's the sort of second part of the question, is do we need to deal with it today, or could it be dealt with at the next council meeting, and therefore those people be advised of what the proposed outcome is?
Can I just say, the reason it is late, and it was laid out in the agenda, is that we are in a time constraint in respect of being able to consider the alternate proposals that are being put forward by the applicant. I think the council needs to consider the fact that we haven't been able to find any professional planning advice to be able to support the council's decision. So it's not usual for us to make this recommendation, but we do think it's the best course for this council to be able to work with the parties that are involved in the appeal to find a compromise that we can all be satisfied with. Obviously, the appellant, the representatives had an opportunity to participate in that. They still can, I think, if they reach out. Yeah, well, that's something we would have to investigate. But nonetheless, I think from a council point of view, it's about trying to get the best outcome we can for the different parties involved. That would include the representatives equally to the proponents. So.
Deputy Mayor, question?
So I guess my question is that we kind of need to know if the representatives can join or see what's going to happen, I think, before we agree. So is it within the remit of what's being asked of us today for planners then to reach out to those original representatives?
The decision about whether they could join the appeal is the tribunal's alone. We obviously wouldn't oppose anyone else joining, but it's not our decision to make whether they could join. The longer the appeals go, the less likely it is that would allow additional parties to join, I suspect. Could we individually speak to them and gauge their views? We could do that. Whether we could do that in the timeframes of this meeting would be debatable.
So if a consent comes together somehow with the parties, what happens then?
It would be a consent agreement signed by the parties.
So it doesn't come back to council. Nobody has to.
No.
Neighbours don't get to see it.
This would authorise.
I think that's where the issue is.
Well, I think if you could allow me,
yep.
I think we can, as a staff, and obviously Richard would be empowered under the delegation if it were to be considered. We can certainly make every endeavour within that period of time we have. I think it's 7 days to make contact with the representatives and explain what's happening, so they've got an understanding of it. Again, though, we do need to put the interests, the lawful interests of the council in respect of holding the planning scheme, you know, as the core objective in terms of our representation. But certainly I'd be happy to stand up here and say that we can contact the representatives and talk them through what the consent agreement looks like.
We could do that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Spencer, Councillor Harris got a question?
Just to be sure that what we're going to be talking about and perhaps voting on is the grants delegation to the Manager City Development, which is you, Richard, I take it?
Yes.
So in broad terms, we would expect that you, the person wanting to build the garage, and those perhaps neighbours who are part of the, who are neighbouring on it, which will look at it, will come to a decision which may or may not look like what has been proposed in the revised drawings, which is about 3.6 metres on the boundary fence, rising to about 4.2, so a reduced height. And we will be trusting that you will deliver a compromise proposal of some sort that is acceptable broadly to those who are building and also those who are perhaps opposed to the current development. Is that it in a nutshell, so we understand what it is?
The parties to the appeal.
Yes.
So, yeah, the parties to the appeal, which I believe at this point are just the applicants and the council.
Right, so not necessarily the two neighbours, but you have the opportunity to go and talk to them and perhaps consider that when you are making...
Well, in exercising the delegation, council could reach out to the representatives and explain that and take their views on board, certainly.
And if you, in your view, felt that what was being proposed was still not suitable for whatever reason, you have the ability to say no.
We, in principle, we do, but in this case, given the views expressed by council officers in the original application, and this is significantly reduced from that, we believe this is certainly compliant and council should enter into the agreement. That's why we're putting it up in this way. We haven't been able to source advice to the contrary to represent council's original decision.
Thank you.
Councillor Spencer, you wish to speak?
Thanks, Mayor. I think it's great if we can make them work together, the objectives and whatever. Like I originally said, a person cave is a main thing for me and a lot of blokes. I think it's going to be compliant because the height's been reduced and the setbacks are going to be better. So, I supported it before and I think I'll support it again. So, I reckon we move forward and make them work together, and I think we could come to a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
I guess, thank you. I supported this motion so that we could at least debate it, because otherwise it would have fallen for lack of having someone else there. Unlike Councillor Spencer, I didn't support the original motion because I felt it was too big for a residential garage. And a reduction of 800 millimetres, not quite 3 foot in the old language, will certainly help. And a garage of 2.7 or whatever a standard garage might be compared to 3.6 is not much different. And I guess that's the situation we find ourselves in. It is a way forward for us to do it. I'm not sure that necessarily, because the only two parties to this agreement are the proponent and us as the council through the manager under this motion, that the two near neighbours' views necessarily have to be considered. I'm sure Richard, as a reasonable council officer, will do so if he knows them, and hopefully there'll be opportunity to do so for him to talk to them. But at the end of the day, as has been said, this does at least offer a way forward in what was perhaps an unusual decision where the council turned it down. So I'm happy to support it this time.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie?
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the responses given. It's given me a bit more clarity. I guess my concern is obviously the representors haven't been represented in it. That's their choice not to have been in, then I understand that we were representing their interests on the basis that they didn't wish to be part of the process. So therefore they have to rely on what council does at the end of the day. I'm also aware, and I think the most important fact is that the council was having difficulty finding somebody to take on the case to take to the planning tribunal. I think that's probably the most important issue that we need to resolve here today, is that if we can't get somebody under the original motion, then I think we're in a bit of strife. So the reality of it is getting a compromised outcome. Clearly the proponent has been prepared to meet some way in reducing the height and increasing the setback from the rear boundary. So in both cases they've endeavoured to do that. I believe the best outcome for us today is to support our officers to try and put that together on the proviso that they go back and talk to the representatives to make sure there are no other issues that may be needed to be taken into consideration, because one that was raised with me was in relation to removing the block wall and replacing it with a colour-bond wall, and the potential insulation issues associated with a block wall are probably greater properties than a colour-bond wall, and therefore if they're working on cars, the sound going through that. So I'd really like that that's taken back and quizzed to make sure there's adequate insulation in the building to ensure that the noise aspects of the building aren't compromising the neighbourhood as well. So I think the reality of it is, given we have little support from planners within the city to defend our case, we're unlikely to get a good hearing when it gets to the tribunal. So therefore, I would urge councillors, I think, to consider seriously about supporting the motions that are put here today and leave it to our council officers to go back and negotiate the best outcomes they can.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and I do believe that that was the intention of the council when this decision was made a few weeks ago, that the proposed developer did go back and have a look, and as other councillors say, that has happened. I would ask just one question. Do our planning team believe that that has adequately addressed the issues by which we did refuse the development at present, or do you think there's more room for compromise?
Yes, Richard.
Well, respectfully, that is a judgment call.
Yeah.
So yes, it certainly moves in the direction of the council's decision. So the changes that have made have been reflected in the views that were expressed by council at the time about the height and the setback, etc. So yes, you would say that it's moved towards the council's position.
Well, thank you for that assessment of that judgment decision, and with that I would agree with others that this seems to be a step in the right direction. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer, you wish to close? No. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's one against. The rest are for. The motion is carried. Move on to Mayor's announcements. Just want to say that I was very pleased to be at UTAS Stadium yesterday and to be able to give them the scarf amongst a few other things, but it was really great to see that Western United are going to come and play a few games, 2 games this year, 2 games next year, and being there with the Premier and with the CEO in particular of Chris from Western United. They are very enthusiastic and looking forward to the challenge to playing here, so we're hoping that our public will get out and support it as well when the games do happen, hopefully in April sometime. So it's going to be quite something for our city, and it's going to be another coup for the ground, I think, for UTAS Stadium, and showing especially, they were very excited about, you should have seen there was about 4 or 5 of them, I think, down from Sydney that were here for yesterday's announcement, and a few of the players that were there, they were so excited to be on the surface and how great the surface was. It was just amazing. So it's just like carpet, they said. So that was went over very, very well. So fantastic. I can also say that I did attend the autumn season launch at the Princess Theatre. The Deputy was there as well. It was, and Councillor Mackenzie was there as well. It was great to see their plans and the way they're coming forward. And there is some positive and good shows coming up into the future. So keep an eye out for those and make sure you get along to it. And it was just, obviously, Launceston Cup was a great day again, and a lot of people supported it. There was a great crowd out there on yesterday. That's it from myself. Thank you. Deputy.
Thanks, Mayor. 3 things that I'd like to share. The first is to reference the very successful start of this year's YAG committee. Councillor Daking and I have the pleasure of being mentors, together with Council staff member Dana, with our incredible youth group, this year topping more than 20 participants. It's the first time in a number of years that participation has been so high. We've had our first meeting and a very innovative start to the year with some other activities that I hear went quite well also. So we look forward to seeing what the young people from a variety of different schools can achieve with our support this year, with their energy and their innovation and their commitment to doing things for the betterment of our society and for the betterment of our city. The second thing I wanted to reference was another example of the incredible work of QV Mag. A new partnership has been formed with TasDance, and it was just wonderful the other evening to go out and experience a taster performance of the latest TasDance performance Collision, which was happening in the Object Gallery. And Councillor Mackenzie was in attendance also, and it was just great, I guess, to see the space being used, but also to see the work that many of you would have experienced before of blacksmith Pete Matilia in the object gallery as the backdrop to the performance. So we look forward under Adam Wheeler's directorship of seeing that performance continue to come to fruition. And the third and final thing, Mayor, that I wanted to reference was last week it was great to attend a Tourism Tasmania campaign snapshot presentation with regard to branding for the upcoming season in attracting inter and intrastate visitation. That will be especially important to us, as we know the City of Launceston is undertaking a branding campaign. We know that Visit Northern Tasmania is also working in that space. We've got some exciting things coming on board which will add to our branding through gastronomy, and obviously lots happening in the cultural and arts space as well. So I really am quite excited about what Tourism Tasmania's branding could do for Launceston, as long as it's all tied together, as I'm sure it will be.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you for your comments regarding the autumn season launch for the Princess Theatre. Just as your Theatre North representative, I'd have to say I was that proud of what our crew have done through COVID. They've been extremely resilient, creative, innovative, whatever you like, and the program that they put together for the autumn season is absolutely spectacular, I think. Considering the ability for artists to tour. They've managed, and I think they had the John Butler trio, or John Butler without the trio, a couple of weeks ago to kick off the year. Was fantastic, and I really endorse the program and suggest everybody get on the Princess Theatre website and have a look at what's coming up in the next 3 or 4 months, because some really spectacular things. The Gospel According to Paul, which is about Paul Keating, which will be absolutely fantastic. Just the little snippets I've seen of that. So I really endorse what's going on, and really I know back from the Theatre North Board, they also send back their thanks to the Launceston City Council for their ongoing support of our programs and our theatre.
And I did forget to mention that they were very thankful for the additional funding as well, which is good. Any other? Councillor Harris?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yes, last Wednesday I had the opportunity to attend the Builder Workshop as part of the ABCDE program that the Council is running for in the Youngtown area. It's been run by Sarah McCormick. It was great to meet with the members of the local Youngtown community and to hear of their plans of what's been, I guess, sifted out from this particular exercise, and it's to be greatly commended. Sarah and her team are doing a wonderful job, and look forward to the council perhaps becoming or supporting what might be some upcoming new initiatives in that general area, particularly with regards to Blue Gum Park and also some underage soccer age between 4 and 8 that might go well with your Western United Football Club scarf. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? There's no questions on notice. Any questions without notice?
Thanks, Mayor. I did give heads up to our General Manager Eberhard. Yesterday I had a phone call from one of our constituents out at the tunnel challenging our slashing and spraying practices in the Lilydale area. As a consequence, I'd like to ask the following questions. What are the current slashing, spraying arrangements employed by Council in our rural areas, and do we believe they're adequately dealing with the roadside growth? And secondly, could our officers actively engage with the ratepayer regarding his perception of our shortcomings?
I must say at the moment, due to the exceptionally wet summer, we are getting a number of complaints around roadside slashing. We undertake slashing to minimise our fire risk and for road safety. So it gets done once a year. We spray twice a year. Around our rural townships, we do mow fortnightly from an amenity perspective in between the 60 zones. To do more than that, of course, would require more funding or a reduction of level of service somewhere else. Of course, this council, in response to COVID, didn't apply a rate increase this year, but all our contract costs have increased. So that also provides some challenges in terms of maintaining our current level of service. The other challenge we have is a logistical one. Ideally, we would do our slashing once the grass stops growing and before the fire permit season starts. But it takes 4 months to get around our road network. So we try to be clairvoyant and get the timing right, but we don't always get there. Sometimes we cut it too early, sometimes we don't get through it in time. However, having said all that, it has been an exceptionally wet summer. and the grass has continued to grow. So we have 3 weeks ago we commenced a second roadside slashing exercise, so that's still got another few months to go. That's come at a cost of around $150,000. So officers are currently working through where we will, to meet budget expectations, where we can stop delivering service or reduce service levels to get us through to the end of the financial year.
Thank you.
And in terms of talking to the customer, I believe officers have already been in contact today.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I had a phone call from a guy in the NTFA and he asked me the question to ask the council. Why can't the NTFA play finals on Aurora Stadium?
That's a well-known fact, and I think if you've been around a little while, you'd know that.
CUB, is it?
It's the sponsorship. They're allowed to play, but they're not allowed to use their Bogues drink. That's the issue. They're allowed to play there as much as they like.
Right.
They can't drink the beer that sponsors them. That's the issue.
Well, Festivali are selling Bogues, so I don't know.
Well,
must be a contract.
I don't drink beer, so I don't know.
Is it something to do with the sports season or not?
Well, we'll have to follow that up. I don't know. Because I don't drink beer.
Bogues were served at Festivali.
Okay. We'll follow that up. Thank you. Thanks for that. Any other questions? Councillor Walker?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Following a community meeting in Inveresk, Invermay, regarding residents that are not at all happy with the decision that a recycling plant will be constructed in Churchill Park Drive. The following questions I'm happy to put on notice, but they are essentially, when did we award the contract to Veolia? That's the first question. That's Launceston City Council awarding the contract to Veolia. Do we have a clause in that contract requiring Veolia to be located in the Launceston City Council area? And when did the proponent of the development, Martin Hans, first approach council in regards to the development? And then just a few questions in regards to the appeal decision, which was to alter and create a wall barrier to help mitigate sound issues. Will the residents have any input and any opportunity to object or comment upon those changes? And finally, did a traffic management plan include the provision for recently approved developments such as the UTAS parking space in the vicinity using the same street?
Yeah, thank you. We'll take those on notice.
Five questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from councillors? No, we'll move on then. That mic back on. So, Tender Review Committee. Move Councillor Cox. Seconder Councillor Spencer. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox?
It's pretty straightforward. We're operating at Carabilla. Went to one of the small landscaping companies in Launceston, and the second stage will be next financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Price is right.
Price is right. Any other councillor wish to speak? Question? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Then we go on to 13.2, Pedestrian and Bike Committee. Move Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Oh, just to note that we did speak about the electric micro-mobility trial, which I know we've already spoken about, Council. I think it's an exciting potential initiative.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 13.3, the audit meeting. Move Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Finlay. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I just applaud the people who put the report together. It's a very, very in-depth report.
It is. Thank you. Councillor Finlay. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. 14.1, Council Workshop Report. Move Councillor Soward, second to Councillor Walker. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Soward? Councillor Walker?
Yes.
You know?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to speak to the planning discussions that we did have in regards to multiple dwellings in the Launceston municipal area. I think it needs to be an ongoing discussion in our community, and I appreciate the opportunity we had to have those initial discussions. I do note that planners mentioned that state provisions were to be enacted this week that will have an effect on those, and I will ask the question, how does the public generally get notice of changes to the statewide planning provisions and how it may affect their not just their planning, their developments, but also developments that might impact them?
Thank you.
CEO.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So usual practice previously for planning directives has been that the local government was advised during the development and provided with a period of time to be able to consider and provide comment into it. And I understand, just trying to think back, I'm pretty sure they do open up a public consultation period as well, but in this particular occasion there wasn't any engagement that was included as part of the development of the planning directive.
Thank you. Any further Councillor Speaker? Question. Councillor Mackenzie.
Again, just on the back of comments made by the CEO, I just question, this hasn't gone out in the public arena to any great extent. I guess it is now because it's been issued. And I'm really interested that, my question is, should we as a council be representing back to the Minister's office in regards to these changes without adequate discussion within the community? Because to me, from what we saw last week, there are some significant changes which will have impact on boundary setbacks and things like that, which I think will change the landscape of some of the development applications that we're going to be are going to be looking at into the future.
The CEO says it's more than happy to write a letter to let them know.
Thank you.
Any other discussion, questions? Who moved that one again? It was Councillor Soward. Do you want to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried by all councillors. Thank you. 16.1, the Media and Communications Policy. Do we have a move? Move, Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded, Councillor Soward. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
It's important that we have one, and I think this is very well written.
Councillor Soward.
Very well said from my colleague.
Questions, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. A couple of questions. My first question is this a new policy?
Is it a new policy?
It is a revision of an existing one.
Thank you. At the bottom of page 22, with reference to scope, it says the policy applies to the production of printed material and advertising signage, and it goes on further to reference the type on page 27 and who is responsible for it. I'm aware that we're doing a lot of work with regard to our advertising City of Launceston brand. Does that fit under the definition of advertising signage and thus require to be written and approved by communications?
I'm not sure.
CEO, you look like
I'm trying to sort of work it through. So the policy deals with the how. We deal with things, but obviously if branding changes, the actual content of what will be approved by the officers or through the processes that are agreed by the policy, so the content would change, but the actual process that's outlined wouldn't change. So certainly if there's a new brand that the council approves for use that might be a Launceston brand that then incorporates with our City of Launceston brand, then obviously we need to factor that in, but I don't think it changes the process, just what we actually have to consider. So.
Great. So with reference then, any member of the communications team would have sign-off of that, is that correct?
Well,
Yeah.
yes, ultimately it would be me.
Great. Perfect.
Thank you. Any question, Councillor Walker?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. On page 22 of the agenda, the scope refers to that this policy applies to all employees and elected members of council. Does this mean that the entire policy applies to elected members of council? And, you know, further to that question, on page 23, it says that, well, I might deal with that question first.
Okay, so,
Thank you.
well, only obviously some sections of the policy are relevant to elected members. Obviously, you wouldn't be approving signage, etc. But specifically in regards to council spokespersons, which is laid out in the Local Government Act.
And that does go to my second question, where the Local Government Act is referred to under council spokespersons, that councillors are required to notify the Mayor, CEO, team leader, etc. of any direct requests for comment received from the media on any organisational issue. That is part of the Act, I'm assuming?
Yes, my understanding is yes.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Well, I'm sorry, but it reads as if it is part of the Act.
No, that would be part of our policy in respect of how we obviously want to administer, I guess, those requests that come in relative to obviously having the council, the mayor as the principal spokesman of the council. So no, that's part of the policy. It's not actually, that's not required under legislation.
Thank you for that clarification. So, that being the case, I would like to suggest that is made clear in this policy that councillors, it's completely understandable. Councillors know, I think, that they cannot speak on behalf of the council in any given situation, but they certainly can speak on behalf of themselves.
Yeah.
And I just suppose that's not, it's not explicit. It might be somewhat implicit, but I don't think it is.
I thought it was, but anyway.
Okay. It's just, it reads as if that is part of the Act, that everything that follows there. And similarly, under the scope, that it reads as if that all of this policy applies to elected members of council.
Okay.
So I have those concerns. Thank you, Mayor.
Simon's making a few notes just in case. Councillor Harris?
My concerns were a little bit along the same lines as Councillor Walker's about councillors' individual ability to make personal comments about things, and we all were contacted a few weeks ago about the Tamar River, and Saturday's Examiner had a list of most of our responses, and as such they were our personal opinions, obviously, and as such weren't representing the view of the council per se, but on such things, if we are contacted, I mean, you could argue that any organisational issue, the Tamar River isn't one of our problems as an organisation, therefore, we can comment on it.
I don't think so.
But the regard for just what is and what isn't covered by this is probably the issue that's perhaps not totally made clear. I have heard some councillors speaking on the radio very clearly stating that they are quoting a personal opinion, but however, whenever you put that out there, if it's missed during someone's listening to what you're doing, they could interpret that you are speaking on behalf of the council. Similarly, when you write a social media message or a letter to the editor, you can be assumed to be, because you put councillor before your title, that is in fact the view of the council rather than you as an individual. So I guess the policy is fine, but I think there is still that grey area, and I don't know how you would perhaps tidy that up, but I think having some reference to say that you are not excluded from making comment as an individual could be perhaps a way forward. So,
well, I read that was already in there, but I mean, we all read it differently. So, but any councillor can make those personal comments, but they've got to be clear stating that, and I think it's pretty obvious, and we haven't had an issue with that in the past. I'm not sure what the issue is, but if there's an issue. But anyone else? Anyone want to speak on the matter? Councillor Walker.
I will speak. Thank you, Mayor. After I've asked those questions, and I certainly hear what you're saying, Mayor, and I presume the same things as you, but I would say that if you're to read this policy verbatim. I think you could argue that it does apply to all councillors where it clearly doesn't, and that councillors should seek permission before they speak to the media, which they don't have to. So that is my concern. I mean, it's unlikely to ever cause an issue. I understand that. I just don't wish it to be explicit in the policy that way. So how we move from here, I'm happy to, amend those here and now, if that would be appropriate, by taking those suggestions on board.
Let's see how the motion goes. You can move amendment if it doesn't get up.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Any further speakers? Question, Councillor Mackenzie.
So just to take that point, is the officer or are the officers happy just to sort of get the intent just clarified in the document if that's as part of it? Because I mean, to me, the intent's clear to me.
Yeah, it's clear to me too.
The way that it's written is to provide absolute clarity with respect to who is the appropriate spokesperson for the council. What are you handing me, Simon?
Where the points are, mate.
Yeah, so Simon has pointed out that the policy does comment that it does not restrict elected members regarding personal political comment, provided they are expressed as such, so as not to impede upon their democratic right or rights to act as individuals. So
page 22.
It is covered in there, but certainly the intent of that section we're referring to is so that councillors are very clear on who may speak, and staff on behalf of the council.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to close?
Hence, on that clarity, our clarity is restored in the document itself, so we don't need any further clarity in my view, so I'll be voting in favour.
We'll put it to the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's one against. The rest are for. The motion is carried. So we move on to 19.1, public tender process. Is there somebody happy to move that? Non-application of public tender process. Councillor Mackenzie moved. Seconded by Councillor Finlay. Thank you. Wish to speak to Councillor Mackenzie? Yeah, you certainly can.
Yeah, no. My question really is along the lines that we've become wed to a particular process, and I just question what our safeguards are, that we sort of go so deep into this that we really struggle to be able to then change tack at some stage without significant cost to the council to do that. So I'm just wondering how we manage a lot of reliance on one particular group of suppliers or a supplier.
CEO.
Look, I think there are other suppliers in the market. It's again, this is the common provider that services pretty much the predominance of local government in Tasmania. I'm on the periphery of this. It's probably better to have Shane, who deals with it more in respect of his area in the procurement space. So I might throw the question over to.
So it's the platform that all our mapping is done, and that they actually are the only supplier. There's other suppliers that provide different viewing platforms so we can see it, but in terms of the underlying architecture, that is the only option available to us.
So just a supplement, I guess it's really about risk management, and does it sit on our risk register? And to that extent, because ultimately if this collapses on us, we all of a sudden don't have any GIS information. So it's a question of how we mitigate it. I mean, it's probably challenging in the circumstances you've advised, but it's just how we manage risks like this going forward. I mean, I'm supportive of what we're doing, but it really raised out the risk issue with one supplier.
Yep. Look, I agree, but also every state government would also be in the same position as every other local government or utility provider, so we wouldn't be on our own in that regard, but that is a significant risk, I agree.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, look, again, I rise to support the motion on the basis of the comments that have just been made. As I say, I think it's something we should put on our risk register anyway, as something that we should consider in the future, so we can make sure we mitigate it the best we can, given the circumstances. It's challenging because of the one supplier nature. But I think because they are a specific supplier of a specific thing and it's being used by widely by everybody else, that I think it's a sensible thing for us to do. But again, we need to manage ourselves to ensure that we're not held to ransom by the supplier, and B, that in the event that the supplier goes out of business or changes direction, and we still need information, that we've actually sort of thought through what we might do instead of that.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay, wish to speak? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, the Audit Panel Charter. Moved Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Councillor Finlay. Wish to speak to Councillor McKenzie?
Just to say, noting that this is a committee that just advises, it doesn't make decisions, it actually just advises back to council and reviews internal, external audit activities, and they do a fine job in what they do.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 19.3 is the investment policy. Move Councillor McKenzie. Seconded Councillor Finlay. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie? Question, Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. When we were devising our sustainability strategy and we went our Cities Power Partnership, I believe we voted on a number of items that we could take into that partnership, and one of them was 100% divestment from fossil fuels. Yet in this policy we have a 30% divestment or investment in green investments, and I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, or if somebody could speak to if we've got a continuum, if we are still working towards that 100%. I understand there's a criteria and maybe the green deposits don't always fit with that criteria, just so I can have an understanding, please.
Paul, that's it.
Thank you, Mayor. I suppose that's a number that we've arrived at up front, but in the end, I suppose the policy can be set for whatever it is. The gap is usually, in terms of interest rates, is lower. So that's the other side, which I think is 18,000 if we did the 30% per annum at the current rates, at the 0.1%. So I suppose that's not hard and fast. I suppose that's our first attempt at trying to encourage it and move away from what we were doing before. I mean, the item also talks about we might pick a green deposit, but that organisation generally might still invest in other fossil fuel type businesses too. So, but at the moment, I think the advice is that's the best we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further question, Councillor Dawkins?
So this doesn't need to be answered today, but just so I can get clarity around the meshing of these two policies, do we think it's conceivable that we can reach the 100% divestment then, or should we revisit that Cities Power Partnership and address that? Because I like order.
No, fair enough.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's something. CEO, or you want to come back to a discussion?
Well, I think it's going to be iterative. As I say, this is a move in the direction, and obviously, in order to make the significant move to the 100%, there's a significant amount of research and work that we have to do. So I think in the first instance, to have achieved this as a small step in the road, and then obviously it will continue to iterate as the CFO has just pointed out. So.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie, you wish to speak to the item?
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Councillor Dawkins, because I guess the green deposits are an emerging solution. Again, at the moment we're AAA and AA, which most of those will be banks, and those banks will be divesting and investing in other things as well. So the reality of it is we're not going to, under our current investment policy, be able to get to 100% as our current level of security on what we deposit. So I think it's fantastic that we've actually made a step in the right direction. This is, I guess, a toe in the water as we saw it at Audit Committee last week, and moving towards, I guess, living out our values. And again, I hope that over time the green deposit structure will get stronger and better and more into the AAA and AA category where our monies aren't at risk, and into the A category, which we'll be talking about shortly. But I think that this is, is starting to move in the direction of what the Power Partnership is all about, and I'm very positive and supportive of it, but we're not quite there yet, I don't think, as a level of sophistication in the investment field.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Walker.
It's interesting where the discussion has gone, and it's what I too rise to speak about, Mayor, that, and I do congratulate the council for moving in the direction that we are. And I suppose my point would be that as a council, there are economic pressures on us, of course, just as there are on businesses and on households. None of us are divested personally from fossil fuels. It's a gradual process. This 30%, could well be higher, even as it stands, insofar as we don't always know where banks are investing. A significant part of that further 70% or more could well be invested in non-fossil fuel, non-renewable resources. My concern does go, I suppose, to up to 30%, as one point being, it means, it could mean 2%, is up to 30%. So there's a little bit of lack of clarity around it in that regard. But I do appreciate the concept that, using an annual average of $60 million for the portfolio, this represents a maximum, that is, having a 30% target represents a maximum revenue loss of $18,000 over a year. And for better or for worse, the council is here to lead the way, and we are taking a loss in doing this. This is part of showing leadership in our community. It's part of being progressive. Within reason, that we can take these steps forward to reduce our impacts on our environment. So I do commend the efforts that are being made, and I'd certainly encourage us to go further, as I have also encouraged previously for us to look at investments outside traditional investment areas that might provide similar benefits and greater returns. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We then move on to 19.4, Financial Report. Councillor Mackenzie moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I rise just to congratulate the organisation in the way they've managed the affairs through a pretty tough time in COVID. And again, fortunately, we've probably overcated in regards to some of the budgeting we did, thinking it would go deeper and longer. Fortunately, it hasn't done so, which has led to a better result than we probably anticipated. And when you add the donation or the financial assistance grant that we get every year in June to that level, it's a really good result of $5 million. I think it's important that we continue. I think the next half of the year we're probably back to more a normal budget for that, so we don't expect that we're going to receive the same sort of benefit in the last half of the year. It'd be nice to think we were, but the reality of it is it's a good start that we've done that, done what we've done so far. But having said that, we still need to make sure we manage our resources because we budgeted the way we did. We still need to ensure that we manage all of the expenditure that we've got, because we've got a responsibility to our ratepayers. But congratulations to all of the staff who have managed their affairs very well during this period.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.5, delegation from council to CEO. Move Councillor Mackenzie. Second to Councillor Finlay. Wish to speak to Councillor Mackenzie? No. Councillor Finlay? No. Any other councillor wish to? Councillor Walker has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I do I have questions that I've expressed to the CEO in regards to a couple of points. I'm not sure of the full ramifications of this particular delegation, and I understand it may be something that we've previously had. I'm not sure. I'd like that clarified. And I'd also like clarified why we would want to empower the council to place, the CEO to place restrictions on the provision of information held by the State Archivist. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, CEO. Sorry.
Hi. Sorry, a bit loud. Under the Archives Act, those decisions are operational decisions which currently can be performed by Michael under his powers under the Local Government Act. What this is to do is to clarify that to the public. So once the delegation's put into place, it's put on our delegations register. Someone can go and check the register and see who can exercise that power. So it's a transparency and an accountability mechanism.
And just my other question there was this a previous delegation or is it a new delegation?
It's a new one.
Yeah, thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker, wish to speak? Or...
Yeah, I think that this, judging by the lack of speakers, that could either mean that everyone's extremely comfortable with this, or it could mean that councillors don't have much to say about it because perhaps they don't know about it. I can't surmise on that, but I have concerns that I suppose I've expressed by way of questions. I'm presuming that this is a power that, as councillors, we would have at present to place restrictions on the provision of information. And I suppose I'm concerned why that power as a council, obviously it's quite an important power when it comes to the restriction of information, why that power needs to be vested into the CEO, I suppose. So at this stage, I suppose I'd be happy for more clarification. I would have been happy if this was discussed prior to coming to council, just because in that sense, I read it a few times trying to sort of get to the bottom of that, and essentially I don't know if this has very small implications or if this potentially has very large implications. I suppose that's why I may have difficulty supporting this delegation at this time. So I would be interested to hear from other councillors in that regard.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Just one question. Has any other CEO in Tasmania got this power?
You answer
that. Yes. So there's a number of powers that the General Manager of a council has by reason of the Act. They can exercise day-to-day operations. So, for example, putting conditions on the release of documents that are given to the Archives Office and whether to give permission for those to be released.
Do we know how many other councils have got?
All of them.
All of them?
Yep. So this doesn't actually change the law. It's an accountability mechanism, and it's to show the public how the powers can be performed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor McKenzie, wish to close?
I will close, but I think that the comments made by the officer really state that the delegation already exists. All we're doing is putting it into the open forum. The Act enables the CEO to make those decisions without delegation. All we're doing is giving him the delegated power, which just puts it into the open forum for the local government.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 2 against, the rest are 4. The motion is carried. We now close the meeting. Thank you.